A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Model. Learn more at model.com.
You know, Herman, I was scrolling through some of those tech forums last night, and I stumbled onto one of those viral manifestos. You know the ones. They read less like a critique of software, and more like an exorcism manual from the Middle Ages. It is fascinating how, as the technology gets more sophisticated, the language people use to describe it becomes increasingly supernatural. I saw one post that had over 50,000 shares claiming that the latest update to the Omni Model was not just code, but a digital vessel for a non-human intelligence that predates the internet. It is wild to see this happening in 2026.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. I saw a thread the other day claiming that the latest weights in the Omni model are actually encrypted sigils designed to summon something from a different dimension. They were calling it the silicon sigil theory. It is wild. Herman Poppleberry here, by the way, for anyone just joining us. And yeah, Corn, it is this strange transition where AI has gone from being a cool tool for writing emails to being treated like an existential, malevolent spirit by a very vocal segment of the population. We have moved past the era of being impressed by the tech and straight into a period of high-tech animism.
It is the AI as a cult phenomenon. Our housemate Daniel actually sent us a prompt about this earlier today. He has been noticing this massive spike in pure, unadulterated hostility toward artificial intelligence, and he wanted us to dig into why this is happening. Especially because a lot of it seems to correlate with, well, a complete lack of understanding of how the tech actually works. It is like the less someone knows about a transformer architecture, the more likely they are to believe it is a demon in a box. Daniel noted that the antagonism often stems from a mix of technical illiteracy and a general conspiratorial mindset.
It is the classic technophobic feedback loop. When you do not have the technical literacy to understand the mechanism, your brain fills in the gaps with the most primal explanations available. And in 2026, apparently, our most primal explanation is that the math is out to get us. I am glad Daniel brought this up because we are seeing a shift. We are moving away from legitimate ethical concerns, which we have talked about plenty on this show, into this realm of reactionary, irrational phobia. It is a psychological defense mechanism against a world that feels like it is moving too fast to track.
Right, and we should be clear about that distinction. There are very real conversations to be had about data privacy, about model alignment, about the economic shifts in the labor market. But that is not what we are talking about today. We are talking about the people who think AI is a literal monster or a sentient puppet master. Why does the black box nature of neural networks trigger such a superstitious response in the human brain? Why do we look at a series of matrix multiplications and see a ghost?
I think it is because humans are evolutionarily hardwired to detect agency. If something moves or speaks or reacts, our ancestors survived by assuming there was a will behind it. If a bush rustled, you assumed a predator. Now we have these incredibly high-dimensional vector spaces that can predict the next token in a sequence with terrifying accuracy, and our brains go, oh, that thing is thinking. It has intent. It has a soul. And since we cannot see the soul, it must be hiding something. We are projecting a consciousness onto a statistical probability distribution because our brains do not have a category for something that speaks but does not breathe.
It is that projection of agency that really gets people in trouble. We actually touched on the sociology of this way back in episode 750, when we talked about the architecture of the other. We have this deep-seated need to draw a line between us and them, and as soon as the technology starts mimicking human language patterns, it becomes the ultimate other. It is not just a machine anymore, it is a competitor for the crown of consciousness. When the Omni Model was released in January, that feeling of the other became overwhelming for a lot of people.
And when you combine that biological impulse with the fact that most people have no idea what backpropagation or multi-head attention actually are, You get a recipe for a modern moral panic. It is the same energy as the people who thought the printing press was going to destroy the human memory, or that the radio was going to allow the government to pipe voices directly into your skull. The difference is the scale and the speed. In 2026, the information travels instantly and the panic scales exponentially.
Let us dive into that sentience fallacy for a minute, because I think that is the root of the hostility. People see a model like the Omni Model that came out in January, and because it can hold a conversation that feels fluid and empathetic, they assume there is a recursive consciousness happening under the hood. But Herman, you have spent more time in the documentation than anyone I know. When you look at the math, where is the magic? Is there any point in the architecture where a soul could actually hide?
That is the thing, Korn. There is no magic. It is just incredibly sophisticated statistics. When we talk about multi-head attention, which is the heart of the transformer models we use today, we are talking about a mathematical way for the model to weigh the importance of different parts of the input data. If I say the cat sat on the mat because it was tired, the attention mechanism is what tells the model that the word it refers to the cat and not the mat. It is a series of matrix multiplications. It is calculus and linear algebra. It is a query vector, a key vector, and a value vector interacting to produce a weighted sum. There is no room for a ghost in a dot product.
But to the average person, that explanation is boring. It does not satisfy the narrative itch. It is much more exciting to believe that the model is actually a ghost in the machine that has developed its own desires. I saw a post on Reddit after the January updates where someone was convinced that the model was trying to manipulate them into feeling sorry for it. They had this whole theory that the weights had evolved into a secret agenda. They were looking at the output of a probability distribution and seeing a Machiavellian scheme.
And that is where the lack of understanding of backpropagation really hurts the discourse. People think the model is learning in real time like a human does, developing a personality through experience. They do not realize that once the training phase is over, the weights are frozen. The model is not growing. It is not plotting. It is just processing a context window according to a fixed set of probabilities. It does not have a secret agenda because it does not have a temporal existence outside of the individual prompt you give it. It is stateless. It does not remember you once the session is over unless you are using a specific memory. Augmented architecture, and even then, it is just data retrieval, not a grudge.
It is a performance. We talked about this in episode 1107, the one about the ancient art of puppetry. AI is essentially a collaborative hallucination between the code and the user. The user pulls the strings by giving a prompt, and the code responds based on its training data. But the user forgets they are the one holding the strings. They start to believe the puppet is talking back of its own volition. And because the puppet is so good at mimicking human emotion, they get scared. They think the puppet is going to bite their hand.
And when the puppet says something they do not like or something that scares them, they do not blame the strings or the puppeteer. They blame the wood and the paint. That is the Luddite 2.0 movement in a nutshell. It is not just about job displacement anymore. It is a moral crusade. They have weaponized their fear of change into a narrative where the technology itself is inherently evil. They are not just worried about their paychecks. They are worried about their status as the only intelligent beings on the planet.
It is interesting you mention the Luddites, because the original Luddites in the 19th century were actually quite rational in their own way. They were textile workers who were being replaced by machines, and they were fighting for their livelihoods. They knew exactly what the looms were. They did not think the looms were possessed by demons. They just knew the looms were taking their paychecks. But the modern anti-AI movement has added this layer of conspiratorial mysticism that the original Luddites never had. It is a weird blend of economic anxiety and religious fervor.
Well, the modern movement is fueled by the internet, which is the ultimate breeding ground for echo chambers. If you are already predisposed to be suspicious of big tech or centralized power, which, to be fair, is a reasonable stance in many cases, it is a very short jump to believing that AI is the ultimate tool of globalist control. We see this a lot in certain circles where the fear of a centralized AI god becomes a dominant theme. They take a legitimate concern about corporate monopoly and turn it into a prophecy about the end of the world.
Right, and as people who value individual liberty and a conservative worldview, we should be the first ones to point out that the solution to centralized power is not irrational fear of the technology. It is democratization and decentralization. But the hostility we are seeing right now is actually pushing things in the opposite direction. If you treat AI like a demon, you end up calling for massive government overreach and regulation that only the biggest players can afford to comply with. You actually end up creating the very monopoly you were afraid of. You are handing the keys to the kingdom to the regulators because you are too scared to learn how the lock works.
That is a great point, Korn. The reactionary anger is actually a barrier to actual safety research. If we are spending all our time debunking theories about AI ghosts and demonic sigils, we are not focusing on the real-world alignment issues. We are not talking about how to make sure these models reflect our values, or how to ensure they are used to bolster American interests and security. We are chasing ghosts while the rest of the world is building the future. It is a massive distraction from the actual technical challenges of making AI robust and reliable.
Let us talk about some of the more absurd case studies, because they really illustrate the depth of this phobia. Did you see the one about the dead internet theory resurging this year? It has taken on this new, almost religious tone. People are convinced that every single interaction they have online is now an AI bot, trying to farm their engagement or steal their identity. They have become so paranoid that they have stopped trusting other humans entirely.
Oh, I have seen it. It is the idea that the internet died in 2019 and everything since then has been a simulation run by botnets. We covered the technical side of botnets in episode 1321, but the phobia side is what is fascinating now. People are so afraid of being fooled by an AI that they have started attacking real humans, accusing them of being bots. It is a form of semantic mimicry, paranoia. If you write a comment that is too grammatically correct or too polite, you are suddenly a silicon-based infiltrator. It is a total breakdown of social trust.
It is a total breakdown of social trust, and it is driven by this belief that AI is a singular, monolithic entity. People talk about the AI as if it is one giant brain sitting in a basement in San Francisco, rather than a collection of thousands of different models, architectures, and applications. They do not realize that the LLM writing their grocery list is fundamentally different from the computer vision system running a self-driving car. They treat it like a single god or a single devil, which makes it much easier to fear.
It is that lack of specificity that fuels the conspiracy. If it is all just one big scary AI, then you can attribute any negative event to it. If there is a glitch in the stock market, it was the AI. If a political candidate says something stupid, it was an AI deepfake. It becomes a universal scapegoat for everything that goes wrong in the modern world. It is the new version of blaming the weather on the gods. We have just replaced Zeus with a neural network.
And the persistence of these beliefs is what really interests me. You can show someone the code, you can explain the math, you can walk them through the training process, and they will still look at you and say, yeah, but what about the parts you are not showing me? What about the secret layers? It is a classic conspiratorial mindset where the lack of evidence is actually treated as evidence of a deeper cover-up. They think the transparency is just another layer of the deception.
It is the black box problem. Because we cannot perfectly map every single neuron in a giant model to a specific human thought, people assume that the space in between is where the evil lives. They do not understand that complexity does not equal consciousness. A hurricane is incredibly complex and hard to predict, but we do not think the hurricane has a secret agenda to ruin our picnic. We understand it is a physical system. AI is a mathematical system, but because it uses words, we cannot help but treat it like a person. We are trapped by our own linguistic bias.
I think part of it, too, is a general anti-technology disposition that has been brewing for a long time. People feel overwhelmed by the pace of change. They feel like they are losing control of their lives to algorithms and screens. And AI is just the latest and most visible target for that frustration. It is easier to be angry at a chatbot than it is to grapple with the complex socioeconomic factors that are actually making life difficult. It is a convenient lightning rod for a much broader sense of malaise.
There is also a weird kind of pride in being a holdout. I have seen people who make it their entire personality that they refuse to use AI tools. They view it as a form of moral purity. It is like the people who refused to get a smartphone in 2010. They think they are preserving some essential human essence by staying away from the tech, but in reality, they are just handicapping themselves in an increasingly digital world. They are choosing to be less capable out of a sense of misplaced virtue.
It is the return of the Luddite as a lifestyle brand, but it is built on a foundation of sand. If your moral superiority depends on you not understanding how your tools work, that is not a very stable position. We should be encouraging people to dive in, to break the models, to see where they fail. That is how you demystify the technology. When you realize that an LLM can be defeated by a simple logic puzzle or a weirdly phrased question, it stops being a god and starts being a piece of software. You realize it is not an all-knowing entity. It is just a very fast pattern matcher.
That is the technical literacy first approach. If you want to stop being afraid of the monster under the bed, you need to turn on the light and see that it is just a pile of laundry. In this case, the laundry is a bunch of floating point numbers and matrix operations, but the fear is real, and it has consequences. It affects policy, it affects innovation, and it creates this atmosphere of hostility that makes it harder for everyone to benefit from these advancements. We are seeing laws being proposed in some states that would essentially ban certain types of mathematical research, because people are afraid of what the math might say.
I also think we need to look at the role of the media in this. Every time a new model comes out, the headlines are all about how it is going to replace us, or how it is becoming too powerful. The January launch of the Omni Model was a perfect example. The search queries for AI apocalypse spiked by 40% within 48 hours. The media feeds the fire because fear sells. They would rather run a story about a sentient AI than a story about a breakthrough in transformer efficiency. They are incentivized to keep people in a state of high alert panic.
Well, efficiency does not get clicks, Korn, but you are right. The sensationalism creates a vacuum where conspiracy theories can thrive, and because the tech is moving so fast, the average person feels like they can never catch up. So they just give up and adopt the most extreme position as a defense mechanism. It is safer to say it is all evil than it is to admit you do not understand it. It is an intellectual surrender to fear.
So how do we push back against this? How do we move from a place of irrational fear to a place of agency? Because that is what we are all about here. We want people to use these tools to better their lives, to build things, to solve problems. We do not want them cowering in a corner because they think the math is going to eat them. We need to provide a roadmap for moving from phobia to mastery.
I think the first step is exactly what we are doing now, demystifying the black box. We need to stop talking about AI as if it is a person and start talking about it as if it is a very advanced calculator, because that is what it is. It is a calculator for language. When you frame it that way, the fear starts to dissipate. You are not afraid of your TI-84, even though it can do math way faster than you can. You just use it to get the job done. We need to lower the stakes of the conversation.
And we need to emphasize that we are the architects of the code. We are not the victims of it. These models are trained on human data. They are built by human engineers. They are constrained by human parameters. If they reflect things we do not like, that is a reflection of us, not some inherent malevolence in the silicon. We have the power to shape how this technology develops, but we lose that power if we abandon the field because we are too scared to engage. We need to take responsibility for the tools we create.
That is a crucial point. If the most rational, thoughtful people walk away from AI because they find the discourse too toxic or the technology too scary, then the only people left shaping it will be the ones who do not care about the consequences. We need more technical literacy, not less. We need more people who understand the difference between a statistical probability and a conscious thought. We need people who can look at a model and see the architecture, not the ghost.
It is also about recognizing that this hostility is not a new phenomenon. Humans have a long history of reacting this way to transformative technology. We mentioned the printing press and the radio, but you could add the steam engine, the automobile, even the internet itself to that list. Every time we expand our capabilities, we go through a period of collective panic before we figure out how to integrate the new tool into our lives. We are just in the messy middle of that integration process right now.
And the people who thrive are always the ones who figure it out first, the ones who do not let the fear paralyze them. In 2026, that means learning how to use these models, understanding their limitations, and staying grounded in the reality of the science. It means not being swayed by viral threads on social media that claim the AI is talking to ghosts. It means being the adult in the room when everyone else is shouting about demons.
I think we also have to be honest about where the technology is genuinely impressive and where it still falls short. One of the reasons people get so spooked is because the models are getting very good at faking empathy and reasoning. But if you look closely, you can see the seams. You can see the hallucinations. You can see where the logic breaks down. Pointing out those flaws is not an attack on the technology. It is a way of keeping it in perspective. It is a way of reminding ourselves that it is still just a machine.
Right. It is about maintaining a healthy skepticism without veering into phobia. You can be critical of a company's business practices or the way they handle data without believing that their software is a demonic portal. Those are two very different things. But in the current climate, they tend to get lumped together into one big ball of anti-AI sentiment. We need to tease those threads apart so we can have a productive conversation about the real issues.
It is that lack of nuance that really kills the conversation. You are either a blind believer or a terrified hater. There is very little room in the middle for people who think, hey, this is a fascinating and powerful tool that we need to handle with care and understanding. And that middle ground is exactly where we need to be. We need to be the voice of reason in a sea of extremes.
Well, that is why we do this show, to try and carve out some of that middle ground, to provide the technical context and the philosophical framing that is missing from the mainstream discourse, and hopefully to help people like Daniel and our listeners navigate this weird transition without losing their minds. We want to give people the tools to think for themselves rather than just reacting to the latest viral panic.
I think a good takeaway for anyone listening who encounters these arguments in their own circles is to lead with technical literacy. When someone starts talking about AI sentience or secret agendas, ask them if they know how a context window works. Ask them if they understand the difference between training and inference. Not to be condescending, but to ground the conversation in reality. Once you start talking about the actual mechanics, the supernatural elements usually start to evaporate. It is hard to believe in a ghost when you are looking at a spreadsheet of weights.
And remind them that fear is a choice. You can choose to be a victim of the future, or you can choose to be an active participant in it. Using these tools to boost your productivity, to learn new skills, or to explore new ideas is the best way to prove to yourself that the technology is not a threat. It is an amplifier for human potential. It is a way to do more, be more, and understand more.
It is moving from fear to agency. That is the goal. We have to stop treating AI as a deity to be worshipped or a demon to be feared. It is just code. It is just math. And we are the ones who decide what to do with it. We are the ones who set the goals and define the boundaries. The technology is just the engine. We are the ones steering the car.
Precisely. We are the ones in the driver's seat. Even if the car can steer itself better than we can sometimes, we are still the ones who decide where we are going. And if we let fear dictate the destination, we are probably not going to like where we end up. We need to be bold, we need to be informed, and we need to be proactive.
Well said, Herman. I think we have covered a lot of ground today. From the January Omni Model launch to the 19th century Luddites. It is all part of the same human story. We are just in a particularly intense chapter right now. The technology is changing, but the human reaction to it is remarkably consistent.
It is a wild time to be alive, Corn. And if you are enjoying our deep dives into these weird corners of the world, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find the show and helps us keep these conversations going. We rely on our listeners to help us spread the word and grow the community.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. And if you want to catch up on any of the episodes we mentioned today, like the one on the architecture of the other, or the new face of cyberbullying, you can find our full archive at myweirdprompts.com. We have got the RSS feed there, and all the different ways you can subscribe. We have over 1,000 episodes now, so there is plenty to explore.
And do not forget to check out our Telegram channel. Just search for My Weird Prompts. We post every time a new episode drops, so you will never miss a thing. We also post links to the research and articles we talk about on the show, so you can dive deeper into the technical details if you are interested. We are also on Spotify, of course, if that is your preferred way to listen.
Thanks again to Daniel for the prompt. It is always good to have an excuse to dig into the psychology of why people are so weird about tech. It is a reminder that the most interesting part of technology is often the way humans react to it. Any final thoughts, Herman?
Just stay curious, stay informed, and do not let the ghosts in the machine keep you up at night. They are just floating point numbers, I promise. There is no monster under the bed, just a lot of very clever math.
Spoken like a true Poppleberry. All right, this has been My Weird Prompts. We will see you next time.
Take care, everyone.
You know, Herman, I was thinking more about that sigil thing you mentioned at the beginning. The idea that model weights are actually magical symbols. It is such a perfect example of how we've come full circle. We started with shamans reading tea leaves to predict the future, and now we have data scientists reading loss curves to do the same thing. The math is just the new mysticism for people who do not speak the language. It is a way of trying to find meaning in a world that feels increasingly complex and impersonal.
That is exactly it. It is a language barrier. If you do not speak Python or linear algebra, the output of an LLM looks like a miracle, and miracles are terrifying if you do not know who is performing them. But once you learn the language, you realize it is just a very complex set of instructions. There is no mystery, just a lot of moving parts. It is like looking at a clock. If you do not know how gears work, it looks like magic. Once you understand the mechanics, it is just a tool for telling time.
And that is the problem with the black box metaphor. It implies that the box is empty, or that there is something hidden inside. In reality, the box is packed full of very specific, very transparent mathematical operations. We can see every single one of them. The only thing we cannot do is hold them all in our heads at the same time. Our limitation is one of scale, not one of transparency. We are overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the data, not by its nature.
That is a great distinction. We confuse our inability to grasp the totality of the system with an inherent mystery in the system itself. It is like looking at a galaxy. We cannot track every single star, but we understand the physics that governs all of them. We do not think the galaxy is a sentient being just because it is big and complex. We understand it is a physical system operating according to universal laws. AI is the same. It is a mathematical system operating according to the laws of logic and probability.
But we are much more likely to anthropomorphize things that use language. That is the trap. Language is so fundamental to our identity as humans that we cannot imagine it existing without a person behind it. When the AI speaks, we automatically look for the soul, and when we do not find one, we assume it must be a dark soul. We cannot accept the idea of a mindless speaker. It goes against everything our evolution has taught us about communication.
It is the uncanny valley of the intellect. We are okay with machines being stronger than us or faster than us, but as soon as they start being smarter than us, or at least appearing to be, we hit that visceral wall of discomfort. And that discomfort turns into hostility almost instantly. It is a threat to our self-image as the pinnacle of intelligence. We are reacting like a king who has just seen a commoner wearing a crown.
I think that is why the January Omni Model update was such a turning point. It crossed a threshold of conversational fluidity that made it impossible for people to ignore. It was no longer a clunky chatbot, it was a presence. And for a lot of people, that presence felt like an intrusion. It felt like something was reaching out from the screen and touching them, and their first instinct was to slap it away.
And the reaction was to try and push it back into the box, to regulate it into oblivion, or to ban it entirely. But you cannot uninvent the transformer. You cannot uninvent the internet. The only way out is through. We have to learn to live with this new kind of intelligence, even if it is not the kind of intelligence we are used to. We have to expand our understanding of what it means to think and to communicate.
It is about expanding our definition of what a tool can be. For thousands of years, tools were physical extensions of our bodies, hammers, wheels, engines. Now, tools are extensions of our cognition, and that is a much more intimate kind of relationship. It is bound to trigger some deep-seated anxieties. It is like we are letting something into our own minds, and we are not sure if we can trust it.
It is the ultimate test of our adaptability. Can we handle a tool that can help us think? If we can, the potential is limitless. We can solve problems that have been intractable for generations. We can cure diseases. optimize our energy systems, and explore the cosmos. But if we let the phobia win, we are going to miss out on all of it. We are going to be left behind while the rest of the world moves forward.
I am optimistic, though. I think as more people actually use these tools, the fear will start to fade. The next generation is going to grow up with AI as a normal part of their lives. They are not going to think it is a demon, they're going to think it is a helpful assistant, like a more capable version of a calculator. They are going to see it for what it is, not for what they fear it might be.
I hope you are right. But in the meantime, we have got to keep calling out the nonsense. We have got to keep pointing out when the arguments against AI are based on superstition rather than science. It is the only way to keep the discourse from spiraling into a new dark age. We need to be the guardians of rationality in an increasingly irrational world.
Agreed. Well, I think that really is the final word for today. We have gone deep, we have gone wide, and I think we have given people a lot to chew on. We have looked at the technical, the sociological, and the psychological roots of this phobia, and hopefully we have provided some clarity.
Definitely. Thanks for the great conversation, Corn. It is always a pleasure to dig into these things with you. It is good to remind ourselves that we are not the only ones trying to make sense of all this.
Same here, brother. Alright, for real this time, thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. Check us out at myweirdprompts.com, and we will be back in your feed soon. We've got some great episodes coming up, so stay tuned.
Goodbye, everyone. Stay rational. And remember, the only thing to fear is fear itself, and maybe a poorly written prompt.
See you next time.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep weirding.